Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alicia Burhow, and I'm the president of the California Board of Accountancy, and it is January 26, 2017. So we are going to go ahead and open up the meeting, and we will begin with a roll call. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Start down there with Ms. Wright.
Kathleen Wright.
Jen Yang.
George Familet.
Xochitl Leon.
Mark Silverman.
Alicia Burhow.
Katrina Salazar.
Jose Campos.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Larry Kaplan.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. One item of note before we get going, as we have the meeting today, we had a little bit of an issue this morning with our closed captioning as folks were trying to type as we were talking. So if we could have folks finish a thought before and no interruptions, so that way we can get the proper language or proper dictation out there for people to understand. I'd really appreciate it. So, but we will go ahead and start with item number 1A, resolution for California Board of Accountancy member Leslie Lamont. So Leslie Lamont served on the Board of Accountancy from January 12th, 2007 through January 1st, 2017. And we have a resolution for her, if you will look on your first item. And I will go ahead and I can read that into the record. Fantastic. So Leslie Lamont was appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger and has faithfully served as the board member for the California Board of Accountancy from January 12, 2007 through January 1st, 2017. And whereas she served as president in 2013, vice president in 2012, and as secretary-treasurer in 2011. As chair and member of the Committee on Professional Conduct and Strategic Planning Committee, and member of the Legislative Committee, Enforcement Program Oversight Committee, and as liaison to the Enforcement Advisory Committee and the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, Education, and whereas, throughout her term of service, at all times Leslie Lamont gave fully of herself and her ideas and acted forthrightly and conscientiously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind. And whereas Leslie Lamont previously served as partner at Withers, Mann & Lamont and Lamont, certified public accountants, and whereas she has served as president of the San Diego chapter of the California Society of CPAs and adjunct professor in accounting for the University of California, San Diego Extension. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the members of the California Board of Accountancy express heartfelt appreciation to Leslie Lamont for the outstanding contributions she made during her term of service on the California Board of Accountancy and to the consumers of California. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda or resolution?
So moved.
I second.
All right. First from Mr. Silverman and a second from Kathleen Wright. Okay. So, do I do public comment on that one? Do I have any public comment? I want to make Kristen happy. All right. Okay, with that, any other discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote.
All right, Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Hines,
Yes.
Larry Kaplan,
Yes.
Xochitl Leon,
Yes.
Jen Yang,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
and Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you very much. That is unanimous with the folks that are here. Thank you very much, and thank you, Leslie, for everything that you did for the board. All right, second, moving on to item B, 1B, excuse me. This is agenda item is a resolution for Robert Rule, a former California Board of Accountancy Qualifications Committee member. Mr. Rule has served on the Qualifications Committee from January 2009 through January 2017, and I will go ahead and read his resolution. Whereas Robert Rule has faithfully served as a member of the California Board of Accountancy Qualifications Committee from January 16, 2009 through January 31st, 2017, and whereas he served as vice chair of Qualifications Committee for 2014 and as chair as 2015, and whereas through his terms of service, at all times Robert Rule gave fully of himself and his ideas and acted forthrightly and conscientiously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind. And whereas he was discharged these important responsibilities in a manner reflecting great credit upon himself and the accounting profession, and whereas his colleagues wish to express him their high esteem and regard. Now therefore be it resolved that the members of the California Board of Accountancy express heartfelt appreciation to Robert Rule for outstanding contribution he made during his term of service on the Qualifications Committee to the consumers of California. So thank you very much for that. Can I get a motion?
I move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so I have a first from Mr. Campos and a second from Ms. Hines. Is there any public comment? Any other discussion from the committee members? Okay, thank you very much. We'll call for the vote.
Okay, Socia Leon,
Yes.
Jin Oyang.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy, Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Alicia Berhow,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Pamela,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Hines,
Yes.
and Larry Kaplan.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you very much. With that, the resolutions pass. Thank you so much for that. All right, we're going to move on to item 1C, developments since the February 2015 United States Supreme Court decision, North Carolina State Board of Dental Examiners versus the Federal Trade Commission. And we will have Ms. Shields talk about that lovely item. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you. So since the 2015 Supreme Court decision, we've just been monitoring recent court cases as well as actions by the Federal Trade Commission, and you should have received, I believe, a copy of the most recent correspondence from the Federal Trade Commission publicly commenting on a proposed regulation by a board in Delaware. So what we've seen since the Supreme Court decision is the Federal Trade Commission intervening in proposed regulatory matters for boards and states, and if they believe that there is a regulation that they believe inhibits competition or vigorous competition, as they state in this letter, they will make adverse comments to that effect in their analysis. And in this letter, we're dealing with the telehealth regulations for this board, and they're zeroing in on an in-person initial evaluation requirement that they believe is a barrier to competition. So you'll notice that in their analysis on page 6, in their conclusion, they state, thus we suggest that regulators consider whether a restriction that could limit entry or access is narrowly tailored to the legitimate goals of the restriction, such as health and safety, and whether those provisions in the law or regulations already achieve or could achieve such goals through less competitively restrictive means. So these are the analyses that we're going to have to continue to be aware of and consider when we're evaluating regulations in order to avoid, hopefully, any adverse comments such as these from the Federal Trade Commission and any other interested parties. Any questions?
Yeah, Christine.
Ms. Wright?
Can you update us on the status of the Hoover Commission in California's, they were looking into a similar issue regarding competitiveness and state boards and so forth?
I believe at our November meeting, the staff provided the final report from the Little Hoover Commission. It's available, I believe, on the website, but we can send you another copy. There were
No.
like 8 recommendations they made regarding, areas that they believe the legislature should take a look at, and we're probably going to see some legislation coming out of those suggestions. So if there's anything you think should maybe be discussed on a future agenda relative to that, you could refer that to Ms. Bowers, and
I
we can
was
put that
just,
on.
you answered the question as to I do recall the report, but what happened then? I mean, after they finished their report, you just said we may see legislative
Right.
development, so.
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? I had a quick question.
Sure.
What would telepractice look like for an accountant? Maybe some of my CPA friends can tell me how that would work. don't know.
I'm not sure, but
Never-
I think that it's just that when you have something that restricts practice in any way, whether it's telehealth or whatever the restriction may be in a regulation, then we need to take a hard look at what public policy objective we're advancing and whether it can be more narrowly tailored so that it's not as restrictive. If there's other options for implementing it that doesn't impede competition, that is something that the Federal Trade Commission apparently wants to see
Oh, good.
in proposals, or at least analyses of proposals.
All right.
So this is what I'm highlighting for myself and staff and for you to consider when you're looking at regulatory proposals. So just keep that in
Keeping that in
mind, and when you're
mind.
looking at things, make sure we discuss those issues when they come up in regulation. Thank you.
Right. Sounds great. Any other questions or comments? Okay, moving on to item D, the report of leadership roundtable of the leadership roundtable regarding leadership responsibilities and the California Board of Accountancy activities for 2017. The leadership roundtable meeting was held January 25th here at the Wyndham Irvine Hotel. And the meeting provided the new leadership an opportunity to meet with the executive officer, Patty Bowers, and her executive team. So during the meeting, we reviewed and planned meeting topics for 2017. And staff also provided an overview of their project wish list for 2017. The project wish list for the upcoming year is full of operational improvements, information technology upgrades, outreach, and many other items to further assist the CBA in meeting its consumer protection mandate. So my fellow leaders and I discussed our goals and priorities for 2017, and the meeting was actually really successful, and we had some of the outcomes. So some of the outcomes we kind of talked about included increasing recruitment efforts for the statutory committees to ensure that vacancies are filled and for succession planning purposes. Continue an emphasis on outreach and communications. We were really successful in 2016 under immediate past President Katrina Salazar. Thank you so much. And I want, you're like, well, you know, I have to throw you your due. And I want to continue growing in this area to further emphasize the CBA's consumer protection message. And furthering the CBA's social media presence. I am constantly tweeting on CBA, but I would like to see more of that. So this is a growing technology that I want to leverage to our benefit. And I would like to thank Mr. Savoy and Mr. Silverman for their attendance and contributions to the meeting, and I look forward to working with them and each of you this year. So thank you so much for all of that. So with that, we are going to go ahead to item E in the report of the January 26, 2017 Committee on Professional Conduct and Chair and Vice Chair training meeting. So this morning, we held our orientation meeting for leadership for all CBA committees. The meeting provided an opportunity for me to relay my expectations for the role of the committee, for the committee chairs and vice chairs. And Ms. Bowers provided an overview of the CBA staff roles and responsibilities to support the CBA and the committee meetings. And then during the meeting, Ms. Shields provided a thorough, very thorough, thank you, overview of how to conduct meetings in accordance with the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. Topics such as roll call, establishing a quorum, conducting a vote, as well as other issues that often arise during these meetings were discussed. So there were great questions asked during the meeting, and I believe it was a great learning opportunity and kind of a repeat opportunity for some of the members. So thank you for all that attended. And I'd like to thank Ms. Shields and the CBA's legal counsel for facilitating the meeting. You did a lovely job today. So thank you. All right, so item F, announcing the new committee and liaison appointments as a written report, unless there's anything I need to know. Fantastic. Any questions on that offhand? Fantastic. Okay, going to item G, the Department of Consumer Affairs Director's Report on the departmental activities. I would love to welcome Jonathan Burke, Board and Bureau Relations Manager, to the table. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure. Let me know if I'm not coming through clear enough for the closed captioning folks. Good morning,
So far, so good.
President Burhow and members, and Happy New Year. My name is John Burke, and I'm the manager with DCA's Board and Bureau Relations team. It is great to see everyone, and I thank you for the opportunity to update you on the activities of DCA since your last meeting on November the 17th, 2016. On January the 10th, Governor Brown released his proposed 2017-18 budget. On January 24th, Governor Brown delivered his State of the State address, and if you would like to see a recording, the State of the State is available at the California Channel's website. Information on the Governor's budget and State of the State address was emailed to all DCA board members. On January the 13th, Governor Brown appointed Jolie Onodera as the Deputy Secretary of Legislation at the Business, Consumer Services and Housing Agency. Prior to her appointment, Ms. Onodera served as the Principal Consultant for the Senate Committee on Appropriations. As we begin a new legislative session, several DCA boards are scheduled for sunset review hearings. On February the 27th and March 6th, the Board of Accountancy underwent a successful sunset review in 2015. Now an update on Breeze. As previously reported, the next step toward a replacement for the current licensing and enforcement system is to document all business processes which will yield business and system requirements unique to the board. DCA programs are currently going down two paths to perform the business analysis. DCA plans to resume discussions with the board within this third quarter to determine the best path forward for the board. An overall timeline for system replacement will become more clear after the business analysis exposes scope, complexity, and available resources. A note now on required trainings. As we kick off the new year, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind board members of required trainings. An email was sent to all board members on December the 29th, 2016, which included details on training frequency and registration. Board member orientation training. Board members are required to complete orientation training within 1 year of their appointment and reappointment. This one-day training will be held 4 days in Sacramento this year, March 21st, June 20th, September 2017, and November the 15th. Board members are required to also complete online ethics, sexual harassment, prevention, and defensive driver trainings. Please note as well, 2017 is a mandatory sexual harassment prevention training year for the Department of Consumer Affairs. All employees and board members are required to complete this training in 2017, even if it was completed last year. Please contact Board and Bureau Relations if you have any questions regarding required trainings or need assistance in any way. And finally, the department's annual report is now available on the DCA website. In it, each program, including the Board of Accountancy, notes its major accomplishments for the 2015-16 fiscal year, as well as new laws and regulations. It also includes licensing and enforcement summaries, staff information, and more. This concludes the update from DCA. Thank you again, thank you for the opportunity. If there are any questions, I'm happy to.
I'd like to open up to the members for any questions. Seeing none, thank you very much. We sound so much more sophisticated with you here, so thank you for that. We really appreciate it. Okay. All right, moving on to item 2, report of the Vice President, Mr. Savoy.
Thank you. Well, there are no formal recommendations at this point for any of the committees. I do have a few comments I'd like to make. I am looking forward to my role as Vice President and working with the chairs of the various committees and the CBA staff as we look at filling vacancies and making reappointments to the Qualifications Committee, the Enforcement Advisory Committee, and the Peer Review Oversight Committee. We have had some vacancies in the past, and we have several upcoming vacancies that I'll be working both with Ms. Bowers and her team to fill. The CBA has been diligent in its recruitment efforts and has solicited participation via the update newsletter, social media, and on its website. I would like to thank the CBA and committee members and Cal CPA for their assistance as we work to recruit members and fill these vacancies. As I review and discuss possible appointments, I'll be reinforcing the importance of committee participation and attendance. Both of these are crucial to ensure that the committees accomplish their roles assisting the CBA in meeting its mission of consumer protection. There will be reappointments scheduled for discussion at our March CBA meeting. Will also provide any updates on recruitment efforts at that time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Savoy. Moving on to item 3, the report of the Secretary Treasurer, Mr. Silverman.
Thank you, President. I'd like to talk about the governor's budget financial report. Our board's fiscal year for 2017-18 proposed budget is $13,410,000 as released in the governor's budget on January 10th, which was just mentioned. The two primary changes in the proposed budget include, one, decreases in expenditure authority resulting from the expiration of 6 limited-term CBA Enforcement Division positions. 2, a change in the accounting procedures for the statewide central administrative pro rata line item. This did result in a decrease in the budget, but not in actual spending authority. Instead of the CBA actually annually receiving funds to pay for this pro rata cost and then having the funds withdrawn monthly, the costs are now paid via transfer that will only reflect on the fund condition statement. The governor's proposed budget must be approved by the legislature. In May, the governor will again review the budget and make any changes via line item veto in order to arrive at a final figure. The legislature must then pass the budget bill by June 15th, giving the governor 12 days to either sign it or return it to the legislature. The CBA's fiscal 2016-17 budget was adjusted down by $763,000 per the administrative pro rata change that I just mentioned. In addition, the 2016-17 budget received a retirement adjustment accounting to an additional $100,000. The resultant total budget for fiscal year 16-17 is now $14,099,000. The remaining general fund loans totaling $21 million plus interest are scheduled to be repaid in June 2017. This will bring the general fund loan balance down to zero. The next loan obligation report is due to be issued by February 1st of this year and will provide an update on the planned repayment schedule. Should the loans continue to be scheduled for repayment this June, then the CBA's reserve fund will increase to approximately 27 months. The CBA's mid-year financial statement will be presented at the March 2017 meeting.
Thank you very much. I'd like to open up to any questions for the members. All right, seeing none. Well, that was very well done. Thank you so much. Obviously, you did a great job. Oh, I'm sorry, who did I miss?
Public comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there any public comments? Christy's going to be on me like,
Sorry.
you wouldn't believe on that one. So, all right. Any last minute questions from the board? All right, again, well, thank you very much. Work very well done. Okay, moving on to item 4, our report from our executive officer.
With that intro.
I know, right? Well, at least it wasn't the phone. It could have been worse.
A couple items under my report. Let me just start with an update on the relocation. The board office is actually going to move. That is going to happen. We do have a new move-in date, which this time we believe it is quite firm, and we'll be relocating in early April. And so we're very excited. Construction's going very well, and so I'm fairly confident it's going to happen. I do not have an update on staffing, and so I'd like to move on to item C under my report and turn it over to Ms. Pierce.
Thank you. Since the last board meeting, CBA member and immediate past president Katrina Salazar was the keynote speaker at Cal CPA's new licensee celebration held at the Bentley Reserve in San Francisco on November 30th. Approximately 100 people attended the event, which honors CPA's license since January 1, 2015. CBA staff continued to promote the updated ethics study educational requirements that took effect January 1. During the months of December and January, staff made announcements on the CBA website and through our social media channels. On February 9th, staff will travel to California State University Chico to speak at an outreach event jointly sponsored by Cal CPA and the university. This event, entitled The Road to CPA, features speakers from the university's accounting department, Becker CPA exam review, and the local chapter of Beta Alpha Psi. CBA staff will speak about the licensure process, including the examination, education, and experience requirements, and the common challenges that applicants face. The event will be webcast live over the internet and is estimated to reach more than 150 people. In addition, staff have been in contact with the University of California, San Diego's Extension program to develop an outreach event. According to the Extension's accounting program manager, approximately 1,200 students enroll annually in their accounting courses. The majority of them are taking classes to qualify for the CPA exam or licensure. And I'd also like to mention, it's not on the communications report, but next month, CBA member George Famlet will speak to approximately 50 to 60 accounting students at Cal State or Cal Poly. University San Luis Obispo about his experiences as a CPA and discuss the requirements and process to become a CPA. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you so much. Is there any questions or comments from the board? Thank you, George, for doing that, appreciate it. Any public comments? All right, with that, thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and move on to item 5, the report of the Enforcement Advisory Committee, Qualifications Committee, and Peer Review Oversight Committee. And we will start with Mr. Rosenbaum, the committee chair for Enforcement Advisory Committee. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, President Berhow and members of the board. First, I'd like to thank the board for reappointing me as chair of the Enforcement Advisory Committee and also for reappointing Nancy Corrigan as vice chair. At our last meeting on December 8th, 2016, down in Southern California, the members of the EAC provided guidance on 29 closed cases and 2 open cases. The EAC also held 5 investigative hearings. Our next meeting will take place on February 2nd, 2017 in Sacramento, and we're also looking forward to the involvement of our board member liaisons, George Familette for Northern California and Jose Campos for Southern California. That concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? Any public comments? I don't know if there's supposed to be public comments. I'm just going to go with it and just say, public comments. All right, any public comments? All right, with that, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right, so we are going to go ahead and move on to the Qualifications Committee, and we are going to welcome Mr. Evans, the committee chair. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, President Berhow, members of the board. I am David Evans. I'm the newly appointed chairman of the Qualifications Committee. Thank you for your support. The Qualifications Committee met yesterday, January 25th, here at the Wyndham Irvine Orange County Airport Hotel. I'd like to thank President Berhow and CBA member Hines, Ms. Bowers, and Ms. Pierce for their attendance at that meeting. At this meeting, there were a total of 4 Section 69 reviews. Of those, 3 were approved and 1 was deferred. The QC is in receipt of the assignment from the CBA to review the current certificate of attest experience form for necessary revisions due to the changes regarding preparation engagements. It is anticipated that the QC will begin this work at its next meeting. The QC's next meeting will take place on April 26, 2017 at the CBA office in Sacramento. That concludes my report. I'd like to invite CBA member Hines to share any additional comments regarding yesterday's QC meetings and to answer any questions if necessary.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated the warm welcome from the Qualifications Committee. I'm honored to serve as the liaison to the committee, and I expressed my availability if they have any needs, and I hope that I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you.
Is there any other comments or questions? Okay, any comments from the public before I let you go? No? All right, thank you very much. All right. Our next victim? No, I'm just kidding. So our Peer Review Oversight Committee Chair, I'd like to welcome Mr. Telizer to come up and say a few words. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I would also like to thank the board for appointing me as the chair, and thank you for appointing Kevin Harper as our vice chair. I think the meeting is going swimmingly with the public comment.
Working hard on that.
We held our last meeting December 9th in San Diego, and at that meeting, one of the major things that we worked on was preparing our draft report for 2016. We'll complete that at our meeting next week, and then it'll be ready, the final will be ready for presentation to the CBA at their March meeting. Also, we've been working throughout 2016 on a project to kind of improve and revise some of the procedures we do to oversight the California Society of CPAs, particularly the work that we do on site at their office. And so we got reports and we had continued discussion on how to improve that process during our meeting. We also undertook an initial discussion regarding the monitoring of the qualified peer reviewer population. And that's a new activity that the CBA has kind of added to our responsibilities. There will be continued work on that as we look to the Cal CPA and the AI CPA to see what sort of statistics and metrics they have for us on that. And so there'll be more to report on that as we go forward. Our next meeting is held next week, February 3rd in Sacramento. One final meeting at the old office, I guess.
Hopefully. No pressure on you.
And that is all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any member questions or comments? Any comments from the public? Okay, thank you so much. And I really do want to thank all the committee chairs and vice chairs for your service. Thank you for everything that you're doing, and please let us know how we can help. Okay, moving on. Item 6, a report from the enforcement chief, Mr. Franzella. Would like to come up and help us out?
Thank you. Good afternoon. So the enforcement activity report, 6A in your materials, is for 5 months worth of data ending on November 30th, 2016. I'll just kind of go page by page, highlight a couple of items, and be available to answer any questions members may have. So beginning on the complaints page, the part that I would like to highlight is that over the last, between November 30 or between September of the last report and November of this report, we received 601 additional complaints, which more than doubled the inventory in a 2-month period. So we saw a big bump from 559 cases at the last report to 1160 as of this report. So we're addressing those as quickly as we can and trying to get them resolved before they age, before they start aging on us in the investigative process. So moving on to page 2. Investigations, I'd like to note that we're still, at this point, closing more cases than are being assigned, so it's helping us with driving down some of our case aging. Since the last report, where we had basically a case average of 309 days due to some older cases, we've been able to get that down by an additional 23 days to 286. And so I'm hopeful that as we continue to close more cases than we're assigning, we'll continue to see that metric fall down. We still have 86 cases that are over 24 months. We did close 16 since the last report, but there were another bubble right behind it that added 20 cases to it. We have a pretty good handle on it. We have 24 cases that are already up for review. Of those 86, one case that was already getting prepared to get referred over to the Attorney General's office, and a couple of cases that are going to be closed by the next report. For this year, we've closed 38 cases over 24 months, and so we're still trying to attack that inventory as quickly as we can. Moving on to page 3 in the discipline. It shows that the board has closed 37 matters so far this year. This report doesn't take into account the work done by the board in the November meeting, which I believe was 24 cases the board undertook. So it'll add a considerable number for the next report. Those didn't take effect till December 28th for those particular cases. So they aren't recorded in here. So really the board's activity on discipline is almost double what we see here. As for cases over 24 months, we still have the one case that has been in the courts for years, and we continue to monitor and track that particular case. As for the other cases, one was one of the matters the board adopted last meeting. We have hearings set for we had a hearing set for a case last month, and cases for this month. And then 2, we have the accusations, and we're going to be working to get those resolved as quickly as we can. Moving on to citations and fine. Again, as I've been commenting, the number of citations is down over previous years, and that's primarily due to changes in structure and processes within the division, really trying to emphasize compliance, getting out there early on and trying to get that compliance before we have to use citation as a means to achieve that. However, since the last report, I think we had 32 at the last report. We have 65 now, so we've doubled it in that 2 months. A lot of that is we're continuing to see as the top violation shows basic requirements. It's really the 20 and 12 requirement, the annual CE requirement. We're still seeing considerable violations there, and actually third violations necessitating a second citation for individuals, so it's a problem we're seeing, and we're working on outreach with our communications officer on how to get licensees to understand that annual requirement and starting to comply with it to kind of maybe drive down the number of violations we're having there. So moving on to probation monitoring. We have increased our numbers since the last report by about 11%, from 108 to 120, and that's going to increase again with the work the board did at the last meeting. A number of individuals were placed on probation, so I anticipate that number will continue to grow over the coming year. We are working to get out to schedule those orientations with them for so it's successful probation as possible at a very early stage. Lastly, on division highlights and recruitment efforts, I'm actually pretty excited on this. This had been an area after we redirected a number of staff over. We had a pretty large vacancy rate in the enforcement division. We are now down to, we note there's 2 limited term ICPAs and 1 retired annuitant. ICPA, those continue to be vacant, but the 1 staff services analyst we've recently filled with an internal promotion. And so that is now filled. And then I've noted the other recent hires, including we brought back a prior enforcement analyst, Carrie O'Connor, and now she is overseeing our complaint intake and probation monitoring unit. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to the board and answer any questions members may have.
Are there any member questions or comments? I just have one question for you, and we've talked about this in the past. How are you doing on staffing? Good, bad, ugly?
I
all of
think,
the above?
as we reported last year, probably at this meeting last year, we had done a pretty significant reorganization within the board, transitioning a number of positions to the board's enforcement unit, and that was really to address some administrative areas that we wanted to get more staff in to free up investigator time, so they're not having to deal with AG's office, complaint intake, dealing with settlement, dealing with citations. And so that's where those staff really kind of went, and I feel we've spent the past year onboarding, training, adjusting processes and practices to really address that area. So I feel we're very strong in that area, and as for the investigative side, it's something we monitor on a regular basis. We'll be doing again probably in a month or 2 as we consider possible staffing augmentations. So it is something we'll look at and ensure that we have proper resources. If not, then we'll work to submit budget change proposals to seek additional resources.
And the only other question I had is the 601 complaints and how it doubled the number to 1160. What happened there? I don't know if you can tell me what some of these complaints are consisting of or where they're coming from. But
I would
that's a big
say,
number.
as you'll probably see in your next report, in the licensing activity report, you'll notice that their numbers for enforcement activity, I believe it's in the renewal section, is higher than prior years. So my guess is they had a catch-up period in there, and cases that hadn't been referred just yet or were on the cusp of being referred last report hadn't been done at that time, and we got a good series there. We've also seen SEC and PCOB cases coming through recently, but primarily I think the drivers, as we show in their internal complaints, are the primary driver, and a lot of them are coming from license renewal and CE deficiencies, peer review questions, substandard peer reviews, certain those types of referrals.
Okay. Okay, any last minute questions, comments? Any comments from the public, even if I don't need them? Do I need them? Yes. Comments from the public? No? Thank you very much, Mr. Franzella.
Thank you.
All right, moving right along to item 7, the report of the licensing chief, and we'll have Ms. Daniel come up.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks.
So our licensing activity report, CBA item 7A, covers 3 fiscal years of statistical data for the licensing division. Page 1 identifies the volume of contact each unit within the division has with our applicants and licensees. Although call stats are unavailable at this time, the division has experienced an increase in calls and emails received. This is primarily due to the increase in applicant inquiries regarding the changes to the ethics study educational requirement, which took effect on January 1st of this year, as well as the new version of the uniform CPA exam, which will take effect April 1st of this year. Pages 2 through 5 cover the highlights and statistics for the examination and initial licensing unit. We are currently recruiting for 5 vacant positions in the unit, which we anticipate filling very shortly. The report shows the fiscal year-to-date processing timeframes as of November 30th, 2016. For applications for initial CPA licensure, those are being processed within 27 days. First-time applications for uniform CPA examination within 37 days, and repeat applications within 9 days. As expected, the unit experienced an increase in applications received due to the recent change in, again, the ethics study educational requirement. And as noted in the EO monthly report that recently went out, the unit's processing timeframe for the month of December was at 37 days. So we did see an increase for that month, and that has rolled over into January as well. But we are working to get those processing timeframes back well within our target timeframe. Page 6 identifies the statistics for the license renewal and continuing competency unit, and begins with our total licensee population, which is reflected on the graph for the prior 3 fiscal years. As a follow-up to the last meeting, there was a question regarding the delinquent population, which we have provided a more detailed footnote regarding that population of licensees to clarify that the majority of this group are licensees who have not submitted their renewal form, and their status has automatically reverted to that delinquent status. These licenses will be subject to cancellation after 5 years of non-renewal. That concludes my report for the licensing division. I turn it back over to President Burhow.
I would like to open up to the members for any comments or questions. All right, I have one question for you. When do you expect to have the 5 positions filled by, or when do you hope to have them filled by?
Yes, we have 3 of the 5. We are currently undergoing the reference check portion of the recruitment process, and those are for 2 seasonal clerk positions, 1 program technician level 2 limited term position. We also have a vacancy for a staff services analyst position and an associate governmental program analyst position. Those 2 we are in the process of interviews.
All right, are there any comments from the public? With that, thank you so much. Thank you. All right, moving right along, we're going to go into the committee reports. And we are going to go ahead and start with item A, the Committee on Professional Conduct with Mr. Famelot.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and provide the report for this morning's meeting on professional conduct. Staff provided an overview of the AICPA Professional Ethics Committee interpretations related to the licensee's obligations concerning confidentiality in the return of client files. When a licensee either transfers sales or discontinues their practice. In terms of the recommendations, there would require an amendment to CBA statutes and regulations. The committee made a motion to recommend that the CBA approve proposed regulatory text in the CBA regulations section 54.3 and 54.4. Also directed staff to submit the text to the Director of Department of Consumer Affairs. In addition, the CPC recommended that the CBA adopt proposed changes to Business Professional Code Section 5063.3 as identified in Attachment 4 of today's committee report, and also direct staff in its inclusion in a 2017 bill, if necessary, seek an authority to carry a separate bill. So at this point, I would ask that, I guess if we want to vote on these two recommendations at this point before we move to the third item.
Okay, so will we take both of those at the same time, or no?
I would take them separately.
Take them separately. Okay, so both of these motions are two fully formed motions?
Correct.
Okay, so we just need to
Discussion.
discuss and, okay, the whole smash. Okay, so I'd like to open it up for discussion among the committee members. Ms. Wright?
Thank you. One comment that I had is where I have seen this come up in practice is where there's a dispute regarding fees. And then with respect to the transfer of a client's documents to perhaps another CPA, the practitioner opts to withhold delivery of those documents until a fee is paid. I don't know how this plays out in the audit arena, but in the tax arena, the IRS has specifically addressed these client fee disputes and the transfer of client records in Circular 230. And the way the AICPA addressed that type of an issue in their proposed language on this client records was to say that if the IRS or any other regulatory, and they specifically mentioned IRS, or any other regulatory agency has standards that exceed those that are included in the CBA regulation, then the practitioner would be required to comply with those enhanced standards. We didn't pick that up in the CBA regulation, and I would point out that, and I'm repeating myself, the IRS has regulations on this with respect to document client records related to the preparation of a tax return, and that falls into two buckets. One, the client record, which is one thing, and number two, which is the schedules that are prepared by the practitioner that are either filed with the return or are backup to numbers that are reported on the tax return. And Circular 230 addresses each of those three buckets separately with rules that the IRS dictates are the appropriate procedure to follow with respect to client records.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and go with Christie.
Okay, so we did look at that issue with respect to the AICPA proposal. The reason why it's not included in this proposal is that we have an existing regulation, Rule 68, which states that after a licensee, after demand buyer on behalf of a client for books, records, or other data, whether in written or machine-sensible form, that are the client's records shall not retain such records. So the licensee shall not retain those records. Then it goes on to say, unpaid fees do not constitute justification for retention of client records. So you're not allowed under California law to retain records when there is a fee dispute. And so because of that, we cannot put that in a current regulation because it conflicts with an existing rule that you already have. So that's why we did not include that part of the proposal in this proposal.
I didn't see that rule as part of the information that we were given.
That was probably something we should have included, so that was clearer.
But
Sorry
if
about
that would cover it, I would only add, and I think that's fine, because actually then California's provision is more strict than the IRS provision.
Correct.
The IRS provision says that if it is a practitioner-prepared document and you haven't released it to the client yet, you haven't released whatever, the return, the refund claim, whatever it might be, then you don't have to give it back. If there is a fee dispute, you could actually keep that
Right.
as,
And I believe
for whatever purpose until you got paid, I guess, would be the outcome.
I believe the 230 that you're mentioning does say, though, that if the state law does not
It does.
permit them to retain it in the event of a fee dispute, they have to promptly return the record. So
Okay.
that's where we get also the standard that you have before you for prompt return comes from that IRS standard for returning the record.
Okay.
Normally, promptly is a little less clear than I would like it to be, but the problem is that there is no standard that I could, in reviewing all the different retention recommendations from AICPA and all the other standards out there, it's really fact-specific, and since we don't currently have a specific time frame, it simply states in Rule 68 that you shall not retain them. It doesn't talk about the return piece. To make it consistent with that rule and also the IRS Circular 230, which is, I think, in 31 Code of Federal Regulations. I want to say 10.31.
It is section-
Let me double check this for you right now. Okay.
See if she gets it right.
I believe it is section 10.28 of 31 of the California, or the Code of Federal Regulations. So it's 31 CFR section 10.28.
I have it here. It
Circular
is
230.
10.38, yes.
So.
28, rather.
Yes. And so that is where we are basing the prompt return standard on. So it's consistent with the IRS standard, but it also allows for reasonable assessment of the facts and circumstances for returning the record. So
Okay.
we did look at the 230 standard.
That was my only point. I just wanted to be sure that that was considered, and I hadn't seen
Correct.
Rule 68, so that's fine. I
Yes.
did have one second question, and that is, where did the 7-year retention period come from? Because with respect to tax returns, the retention period is generally recommended to be indefinite.
Well, if you can provide me the authority for indefinite retention, but our statutes relating particularly to audit practice is 7 years.
Well, the
The
statute.
California statute.
Right, the statute of limitations with respect to the audit of a return would clearly have expired within the 7 years, but the issue that comes up is documentation of basis. Documentation of basis, if you sell something, could mean that you bought something 15 years ago, and the IRS could demand that you document your basis in whatever it is that you're selling, and that being the case, whenever it was that you would have to provide documentation, or else they would disallow basis, and you'd be subject to tax on the full amount of the proceeds received. So that's why it's generally recommended practice that you keep tax returns indefinite.
Indefinitely? Well, if you can provide us that authority to look at, because
Okay.
5097 is what, of the Business and Professions Code, is the 7-year retention period. That is what we suggested, and it's 7 years from the sale or transfer, so the records could be quite a bit older from the actual, whatever that service was that had been provided. But the only problem I have with putting an indefinite requirement is the burden on the licensee if we're
I
able to
agree.
justify that. And
I
so I would
agree.
need some specific authority that you could find that says they have to retain it indefinitely.
Yeah, and my understanding, that's for the person, for their own tax records, if they have a
Right.
basis issue, not the licensee or the firm.
Okay.
That would be a big burden to maintain a
It would.
return
Correct.
forever of every return that you've ever worked on.
Right.
If you've got a basis issue, that's your duty to maintain those records.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a firm-by-firm type of thing. Unfortunately, we keep clients forever.
Yeah.
Having to go back to 1960s to actually find something for somebody. Now it's electronic, so it's not as burdensome. But I only imagine, I've never seen the warehouse where we actually have paper, but I think about the Raiders of the Lost Ark, that the warehouse kind of went on forever, and maybe that's somewhere in there is our records. But it's a firm-by-firm issue in terms of, what you hold on to, because you never know when a client's going to sell something, to have to get this, and it could be burdensome.
Actually, I wanted to point out, Mr. Franzella.
I was only going to articulate what Board Member Fennell had mentioned, that the burden's on the client, not the licensee, to maintain. So we picked the 7-year retention, consistent with the audit documentation requirement under, I believe it's 5097. So.
So are we good with the motion as it, well,
One question. In the AICPA document, I think there was some reference to a 90-day period for deemed consent, and I wasn't able to be here for the meeting, so I don't know how, I didn't see that in any of our regulatory language. But did that get dispensed for a similar reason as to other?
do you want to answer that?
Yeah, we did include the 90-day, a minimum 90-day period. The ICPA standard said 90 days, but then it kind of got convoluted that it could be longer or shorter. So we've established it in 54.3A. It's about the 5th or 6th line down. It says within 90 days, or not to be less than 90 days.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board members? Any other public comment? Okay. And then I remember my training this morning, so if we have to repeat, I believe, the motion that we have on the table. Sorry
So
about that.
one at a time, do we agree on
One
that?
at a time. So the first one we'll take.
So the first motion, the CPC recommends that the CBA approve the proposed regulatory text in the CBA regulation sections 54.3 and 54.4, and direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency for review. And if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all necessary steps to initiate the rulemaking process and make any changes to the package and set the matter for hearing.
Okay. So with that, we'll go ahead and call for the vote.
Okay. Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Jen Oying,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Hines,
Yes.
and Larry Kaplan.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that passes unanimously. Appreciate that. Okay, with that, Mr. Familott, would you like to repeat the second motion from the committee?
Okay, the second motion is the CPC recommends that the CBA adopt the proposed changes to the Business Professions Code Section 5063.3 as identified in Attachment 4 of today's handout, and direct staff to seek its inclusion in a 2017 omnibus bill, or if necessary, seek an author to carry a separate bill.
Okay. Is there any other questions or comments from the board members? Are there any questions? Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Well, I just
Shields.
want to, for those that weren't here this morning, it's, the reason we're suggesting this amendment is because the AICPA proposal suggested this addition, but our statutory language is in statute. So that to amend the statutory language, we have to go through this process to include the language suggested by AICPA.
Okay, I'll repeat it again. Any member question, comments? Any questions or comments from the public? Okay, with that, thank you very much, and we'll call for the vote.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Jen Oying,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Larry Kaplan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Hines,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhow.
Yes. All right, well, thank you very much. That passes unanimously. I think we have a third motion, correct?
Yeah, so
Okay.
the CPC also made a motion to direct staff to work with legal counsel on a regulatory language for sale or transfer of a practice to a non-licensee owner for board consideration at this meeting. However, subsequent to the meeting, it was determined that this change would have to be done in a statute and not a regulation. Accordingly, I'd like to invite Mr. Franzella to provide some additional information on this issue prior to the board taking any action on this motion.
Mr. Franzella.
Thank you. So we did meet with council during the lunch break to assess how to include the potential for a licensee selling or transferring part of his practice to a non-licensee owner, which is contemplated in the AICPA's Code of Conduct, but was not addressed in ours. When we began exploring with council the actual statutory language, so if I can direct members' attention to Attachment 4, this particular statute addresses when disclosure is allowed of confidential client information. It's generally strictly prohibited, except in those sections that are outlined in 5063.3. And if we look specifically to subparagraph A4, the non-underlined text is what currently exists in that particular section, and it says disclosure made by a licensee or licensee's duly authorized representative to another licensee. So it is somewhat limiting. We cannot, through regulation, expand the statute. And so if we were to try to allow for a licensee to disclose confidential client information via regulation, as we were considering this morning. Under 54.3, it would go beyond the scope of the statute and where its limitations stop between licensee and licensee. So what, after speaking with counsel, we're proposing is the board directs staff to work with counsel to amend section A4 to allow for disclosure made by a licensee or licensee's duly authorized representative to another licensee or person, thereby allowing for a non-licensee to obtain this information as part of a sale or a merger of a or transfer of a practice. Provided that occurs and we make that amendment, then we would be able to amend section, the newly proposed sections via what's called a section 100 change, where we just make changes to the statute to comply with, or changes to the regulation to comply with the statute. So that language would not need to necessarily come back in that kind of more formalized process to direct the rulemaking and so on. So I'm requesting, our staff is requesting that the board basically table the CPC's motion related to working with counsel and bringing back language to today, because you don't have any language in front of you right now. So table that aspect of it, but then direct staff to work with counsel to further amend 5063 to allow for non-licensee to obtain confidential client information as part of a sale or a transfer.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I don't want to repeat.
I know, right? Okay, so there's a first from Mr. Savoy and a second from Mr. Silverman. What am I missing?
Well, I mean, you could just vote down the motion that's on the floor, or you could table the motion if you'd like. I mean, those are your options, but you could just reject it, and that way you could then take up the other motion that Dominic is requesting.
So I'll amend to say I'd like to table the original motion
Okay.
and adopt Dominic's language in my motion.
Direct staff to work with legal counsel to propose changes to the text in 5063.3 of the Business and Professions Code.
Yes.
Your voice has changed.
I know. Okay, well, thank you for that friendly amendment, per se. So I have a first from Mr. Savoy and a second from Mr. Silverman. Are there any other member comments or discussion? Yes, Ms. Wright.
I would only add, and only, Dominic, because you mentioned it, that, well, we'll wait and see what the language turns out to be, but adding the word person, I would have, I'd have comments if that's the wording.
Mr. Frinzella?
So the statute actually defines person to mean a firm, a limited liability company, partnership. It's not just a natural person. It's more expansive to include licensee, non-licensee, association. So it would allow for a broader interpretation.
This morning, the example that was used was tax, that if you were selling your tax practice to a non-licensee, in the state of California, California is one of only 4 states that do require the preparation of a tax return be done by someone who is licensed either as a lawyer, an enrolled agent, a CPA, or by the Tax Education Council as a tax return preparer. You are not allowed to do tax returns in the state of California without one of those 4 license statuses, without maintaining one of those 4.
We're kind of going beyond the tabling piece here. Can we just deal with that when it comes back to us?
That's what I would, my only comment was the word person might be something we'd want to think
How
about.
about we go ahead and see what the committee
That would
and
be
Mr.
fine.
Frinzella brings back to us
That
at
would
the
be
next
fine.
meeting. Okay, great. Are there any comments from the public, in case I missed that?
Also, if you
Okay.
have some language you'd like to send Ms. Bowers, we'd be happy to take a look at it. If
Okay.
you have some ideas,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and call for the vote.
Jen Oyang,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Larry Kaplan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Hines,
Yes.
George Pamela,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhow.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. It passes unanimously. So Anything else, Mr. Familet?
Nope.
All right, well, thank you very much for your report.
Thank you.
All right, now we are going to move on to 8B, the Enforcement Program Oversight Committee. Ms. Leon.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm happy to provide a report from this morning's January 26th Enforcement Program Oversight Committee meeting. The first item, 8B2, on the revision schedule for the disciplinary guidelines and model orders. Staff provided an update on the changes to the schedule. Staff also noted that a potential regulatory hearing would take place in July or September of this year, and there are no actions required on this item. I'll pause there just in case there's any questions.
Questions? Do I need to do, because it's not a, it's just a proposed, I don't have to do public comment, or do I? Or should I do it, just be on the safe side? All right. I'm going to have this totally down by November, I promise you. Okay, any other member comments or discussion? Any member, oh, I'm sorry. Was that you, Larry, or no? Okay. Any public comments? All right. Thanks for that.
The second item that we discussed, item 8B3, on possible action regarding of proposed changes to the disciplinary guidelines and model orders, Title 16, California Code Regulations, Section 98, and Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Section 99.1, rehabilitation criteria for denials, suspensions, revocations, restorations, reduction of penalty. Again, the staff provided a great overview of this item. Staff noted that the guidelines reflect various changes requested and adopted by the CBA over the past few meetings. Staff also noted that in the last November 2016 meeting, the EPOC committee considered a CPC request to reduce the minimum penalty for violations of Business and Professions Code Section 5100A from revocation stayed, actual suspension of 120 days, and 3 years of probation to suspension stayed and 1 year of probation. At the conclusion of that meeting, the EPOC committee elected to table the discussion and request that staff narrow the reduction of convictions related to drugs and alcohol. Staff updated the guidelines, which are in attachment 1, to narrow the reduction in the minimum penalty for violations of Section 5100A to convictions involving drugs and alcohol. For ease of members' review, an excerpt of the revised text is found on page 4 of our materials. In developing the more narrowed approach, staff focused on the alcohol and drug convictions that are more common with respect to actions taken by the CBA, namely DUIs and drug possession. For DUIs, staff included revised text to reference Vehicle Code Section 23152. As for crafting language specific to drug possession, staff looked to Proposition 47 passed by voters in 2014. Proposition 47 reduced penalties for certain offenders convicted of non-serious or non-violent property and drug crimes. As Proposition 47 used the term possession for personal use, staff used the same terminology in revising the language. To conclude, the EPOC committee recommends that the CBA do the following 4 items. Number 1, support a reduction in the minimum penalty for violations to Business and Professions Code Section 5100A. Number 2, approve the regulatory text in the guidelines and CBA regulations sections 98 and 99.1. Number 3, direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency for review. And lastly, and if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all the steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, making any non-substantive changes to the packages, and set the manner for hearing. Lastly, the EPOC also noted that it believes that the reduction to the minimum penalty for violations of Business and Professions Code Section 5100A related to DUIs and drug possession for personal use provide sufficient time to evaluate risk and rehabilitation. That's it.
Okay, well done. Can I open it up to any member comments or questions? This is a fully formed motion on the table. Okay.
Just to be clear, this means that it doesn't diminish the board's ability to evaluate the licensees, the infractions that the licensee has been disciplined over. It's really just about guiding the board in how to issue disciplinary actions when there is an infraction committed by the licensee. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right, these are just your policy position on where the minimum penalty should be for this type of conviction, or these types of convictions. So it's a guideline, it can go, depending on the facts of the case, can be evaluated, and if there's aggravating factors, the penalty can be increased. If there's mitigating factors, the penalty can be decreased from the 1 year.
Thank you.
So are there any other member comments or questions? Any public comments? Okay. And does she need to repeat this again? Because this is a long one. Okay, good. All right, so we'll go ahead and call for the vote.
Chen Oyang,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Larry Kaplan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Hines,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and George Family.
Yes.
Well done, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, and we are going to go ahead and move on to item C from our Legislative Committee, and Ms. Hines.
Thank you very much. Today, the Legislative Committee met, and staff provided an informational item to the Legislative Committee which contained the following: an overview of the Legislative Committee's purpose, an overview of the legislative process, including some critical dates for introduction of legislation and when bills must pass out of the House of Origin, considerations for taking positions on legislation, and an overview on the regulatory process. This was an informational item only, and no action was taken by the by the Legislative Committee, although there is an expectation that there will be legislation for the board to consider at the next meeting.
Okay. Are there any member comments or questions? Any public comments? Thank you so much. Very, very well done, Ms. Hines. And I want to thank all the committee members for making my first meeting so far really easy. So I know that will not stay the same. Okay, so moving on, we're going to go on to item 9, the acceptance of the minutes. All right.
What happened to mobility?
We canceled the vote.
Thank you.
All right, so I was getting there. Because the Mobility Stakeholder Group meeting was canceled, we will be deferring the minutes from the November meeting to the March meeting. So I would like to go ahead and get a motion to approve the minutes specifically for items 10A through D and 10F through H. And I know I'm going to do something wrong there. Or do I need to
I
break it
move
out?
approval of those minutes.
The only comment is one of the minutes had me as being in the audience when I was absent.
Do you know which one?
That would be Legislative Committee, the green ones. Sorry, you don't have colors in it.
Oh. So the Legislative Committee has you in there?
Yeah, it has me as
For November?
observing.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, you do already.
I guess I can.
So I would just amend my motion
Thank
to
you.
approve items 10A through D and 10F through H with the modification to item 10C to remove reference to Mr. Savoy.
Okay. Is there a second?
Sure, second. I
Okay,
have a
any
comment,
comments?
a very brief comment.
Okay.
I'm sorry, is it appropriate now? Okay.
Sure.
On, what page is this? My buddy over here found a discrepancy related to me, so.
On the CBA minutes, under the time, under Kathleen's time, it says 12:03 a.m. and not p.m.
Aw.
Uh-oh.
Ooh.
Oh.
So she would have been there for a long time.
All right. Yes, indeed.
camped out.
Can we make that change?
Typo.
A typo. All right. So, okay, we have a first from Mr. Campos and a second from Ms. Wright with the addition, or the corrections. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and be specific about this. So we are going to be accepting the minutes for November 17th, 18th, 2016 California Board of Accountancy meeting, minutes of November 17th, 2016 Committee on Professional Conduct meeting, minutes of the November 17th, 2016 Legislative Committee, minutes of the November 17th, 2016 Enforcement Program Oversight Committee. We're deferring the Mobility Stakeholder Group. No? Oh, we'll table that. We'll go back to that. Okay, so we will be, the motion also continues with the minutes of the October 19th, 2016 Qualifications Committee, minutes of the July 7th, 2016 Enforcement Advisory Committee meeting, and the minutes of the August 19th, 2016 Peer Review Oversight Committee. Okay, with that, oh, I'm sorry, any other corrections, member comments, any public comments? Okay, that will call for the vote, and then we'll go back.
All right. Alicia Burhell?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
George Familet?
Yes.
Larry Kaplan?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Hines?
Yes.
Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Abstain.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
And Jen Oying?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. That motion passes. And we're going to briefly go back, and can I entertain a motion to table the minutes for the November 17th, 2016 Mobility Stakeholder Group meeting?
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, she just got you. Okay, so first from Ms. Hines and a second from Ms. Salazar. Any member comments? Any public comments? Fantastic. All right, we'll call for the vote.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Jen Oying?
Yes.
Larry Kaplan?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Hines?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
George Familet?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
Alicia Burhell?
Yes. Okay, with that, the motion passes unanimously. Fantastic. All right, thank you very much for that. Moving on to item 10, other business. Agenda item 10A1 is a report on public meetings of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants attended by a California Board of Accountancy representative. Bueller? No? Anyone? All right. We will go ahead and move on. And then do we have any, oh, I'm sorry. And then item B, the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, report of public meetings of the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy attended by a California Board of Accountancy representative. No? All right. Item 2, discussion and possible ratification of staff responses to the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy focused questions regarding the regulation of the accounting profession in California. That is Rebecca. Oh, how about it?
The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the CPA with staff responses to the NASBA focus questions. The responses assist the NASBA regional directors with staying apprised of each state's policies and procedures and to see where improvements or adjustments might be made. No action is required on this agenda item unless the CBA would like additional information provided to NASBA on the questions. And at this time, I would like to turn it back over to President Burhow and would be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments from the board members? Any oh, sorry, yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to know whether the board wanted to, like, approve or ratify anything that the staff had provided to NASBA, that if they felt that they needed to do that. Because it was noticed for that purpose, so I just wondered.
Okay. Don't think so?
All right.
Anyone have anything? All right. Okay. any
Sounds like we should word that a little differently than going forward, since it doesn't, I don't think we always vote on that particular item.
Okay.
We discuss it, but.
All right. Thank you for that, Mr. Campos. Any public comments? Okay, with that, thank you very much, Ms. Reed. Okay, let's see. All right, moving in to closing business. Any public comments on the Board of Accountancy meeting today itself? And any agenda items for future California Board of Accountancy meetings? Anyone? Members of the board? Ms. Wright?
Alicia, yeah. I'm sorry, going back for a moment to the focus questions, there are a couple of items listed in the questions where CBA's responses, we have not yet discussed this issue. I won't enumerate them all, they're here in the focus questions. I'll just ask, are we going to consider those issues at future meetings, or are they irrelevant for CBA? They seem to be relevant issues for CBA.
Which issues particularly?
Yeah, well, the number 5, number 6.
Okay, I'm confused.
There's 2 parts to 6A and B, and we respond to both by not really having formulated an opinion. Those are the ones.
Okay, got it. All right.
And number 4, I've asked to be included on the agenda, which you've indicated would come up in May.
Okay, so you want to put this on for a future agenda item?
Well, yes, I guess. I mean, my question is, are these issues that NASBA has raised in this questionnaire relevant for CBA, and should we put them on the agenda at some future point to discuss?
I think that would be up to you, if you would like to formally request that.
Well, if NASBA has raised the issue as one to be considered by the boards, I think I would like to add, if it's
So you're
okay
making
with
that
everyone,
request?
that we likewise consider it.
Okay, so we will go ahead and add that request.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other board member comments or questions? And I'm just going to say it so Christy loves me forever. Any other public comments? All right, excellent. Okay, so moving right along. At this point, we are hitting item 12, and pursuant, at this time, the CBA will be going into closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11126C3 to deliberate on disciplinary matters. So specifically, we are going to be discussing stipulated settlements, default decisions, and proposed decisions, as well as pursuant to Government Code Section 11126E. The California Board of Accountancy will also meet to receive advice from legal counsel on litigation David Greenberg versus the California Board of Accountancy, Los Angeles County Superior Court, case number BS 155045. And with that, we are going to go ahead and go into closed session. Thank you.